Have you ever been treated like you were invisible? Not just overlooked, but deliberately ignored? What if every single day people walked past you like you were nothing but garbage on the roadside? Their footsteps quickening, their faces turning away in disgust. What if children made a game of mocking you? What if your own community, family members, and even friends believed your suffering was punishment from God? How many years could you survive being treated as less than human before your soul would shatter completely? For Bartimaeus, it had been 27 years. 27 years of total darkness. 27 years of empty stomachs and emptier hopes. 27 years of begging for scraps from people who couldn't even bear to look at him. Until one desperate day on the Jericho Road, when he heard the whispers, "Jesus is coming. Welcome to Hidden Heroes of Faith." And in today's video, you'll witness what happened when a man with nothing left to lose made the bravest decision of his life and changed his destiny forever. Stay with me until the end, because this forgotten story contains the exact blueprint for your breakthrough. You'll discover how to recognize divine opportunity when it appears, how to push past the voices telling you to stay in your place, and the one question Jesus is waiting for you to answer that will unlock your healing. The transformation that happened for Bartimaeus can happen for you today, if you have the courage to raise your voice above the crowd. The Jericho Road was bustling that day. If you were there, you'd feel the coarse dust coating your throat with each breath. You'd hear the constant rhythm of hundreds of sandals scraping against stone. You'd smell the sweat of travelers mixed with spices from merchant carts, all beneath the merciless heat of the Judean sun. Passover was approaching. The road to Jerusalem was crowded with pilgrims, their excited voices creating a tapestry of sound that washed over Bartimaeus as he sat in his usual spot. This corner was his office, his home, his prison. A small patch of earth where he spread his tattered cloak each morning to catch whatever meager coins might fall his way. But Bartimaeus wasn't always blind. As a baby, his eyes had seemed normal. His mother often told him how she'd gazed into them, searching for recognition, until that terrible day when she realized her baby boy could see nothing. Nothing at all. The whispers started then. What sin did his parents commit? He must be cursed. Keep your children away. In first-century Judea, blindness wasn't just a physical condition, it was a sentence of social death. Religious leaders taught that such afflictions were divine punishment. Blind men couldn't work normal jobs, couldn't participate in temple worship, couldn't marry or have families of their own. So Bartimaeus became what society expected of him, a beggar. Day after day, year after year, he'd wake before dawn, feel his way along the familiar path to his corner, and begin the humiliating ritual of asking for help from people who couldn't wait to get away from him. Some days he'd return home with enough coins for a small piece of bread. Most days, just enough to stay alive. Many days, nothing at all. But something burned inside Bartimaeus that years of darkness couldn't extinguish. Something society couldn't see when they labeled him the blind beggar. A stubborn, fierce hope that refused to die. That particular morning had been worse than most. 3 days without a proper meal had left Bartimaeus lightheaded, his stomach twisted with hunger pangs so sharp they sometimes made him gasp. Children had been particularly cruel that day. One boy had spit on him. Another had stolen the few coins from his cloak while friends distracted him with false kindness, asking about his blindness only to laugh at his answers. By midday, despair hung heavy on Bartimaeus' shoulders. He wondered, as he often did, how much longer he could endure this half-life. This existence, where he was barely human in anyone's eyes. Then he noticed it. A shift in the energy around him. The crowd's murmur transformed into something electric. People were rushing past him faster than usual, calling to others in the distance. "He's coming this way!" "Are you sure it's him? The one who healed that leper in Capernaum? They say he made a paralyzed man walk in Bethesda." Bartimaeus' heart began to pound against his ribs. His ears, sharper than most from years of relying on sound, strained to catch every word. "Jesus of Nazareth is coming down this road." Those words hit Bartimaeus like a physical force. His breath caught in his throat. His hands began to tremble. Jesus of Nazareth. For months now, Bartimaeus had been collecting stories about this man like precious gems. Every traveler who spared a moment to speak to him, every conversation he overheard on his corner, he absorbed it all, building a picture in his mind of a rabbi unlike any other. A man who touched lepers and they were cleansed, who commanded demons and they fled, who placed mud on blind eyes and restored sight. Always these miracles happened somewhere else, to someone else, in Galilee, in Jerusalem, in another town, another time. But now, Jesus was coming down this very road, right past this very spot, today. What would you do if your one chance at healing was approaching? If everything you'd ever hoped for was suddenly within reach, but could easily pass you by if you didn't act? Fear gripped Bartimaeus' chest. Doubt whispered in his ear. Who are you to call out to him? You're nothing but a beggar. What if he ignores you like everyone else does? What if he rejects you in front of everyone? Could you bear that humiliation? The crowd was growing louder. The footsteps were drawing nearer. Jesus was getting closer with every heartbeat. Bartimaeus faced the moment of truth that would define the rest of his life. He could remain silent, clinging to the little dignity society allowed a blind beggar. Or he could risk everything. Risk more rejection, risk being put in his place, risk being told once again that he wasn't worth stopping for. In that moment, something broke open inside him. 27 years of darkness. 27 years of rejection. 27 years of being nothing but the blind beggar. All of it crystallized into a single desperate realization. He had nothing left to lose. So Bartimaeus did what desperate people do when they've reached the end of themselves. He filled his lungs and shattered his silence with a cry that came from the deepest part of his soul. Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me! His voice tore through the crowd noise like lightning through a storm cloud. People nearby stopped walking. The sudden silence told him they were staring. He could feel their shock, their disapproval pressing against him like physical weight. "Be quiet," someone hissed near his ear. "Know your place," another voice snapped. "How dare you disturb the teacher?" a third scolded. Rough hands pushed at his shoulders, trying to silence him, to make him small again. Someone's fingers dug into his arm with bruising force. The crowd's reaction was quick and harsh. They shushed him, scolded him. Some even threatened him. After all, who was he to call out to the famous rabbi? What right did a blind beggar have to Jesus' attention when so many important people were seeking it? Have you ever wanted something so badly that no force on earth could stop you? That every fiber of your being screamed for it, that you'd rather die trying than live without trying at all? That's where Bartimaeus found himself. The crowd's disapproval crashed against him like waves, but he had spent a lifetime drowning in neglect. He had endured years of passing footsteps and whispered judgments. This moment, this one moment, might never come again. Instead of shrinking back, instead of accepting his place, Bartimaeus did something that shocked everyone around him. He shouted louder, "Son of David, have mercy on me!" The second cry exploded from him with even greater force than the first. It carried every ounce of his pain, his loneliness, his desperate hope. It rose above the noise of the crowd, above their attempts to silence him, above 27 years of being told he didn't matter. Notice what Bartimaeus called Jesus, Son of David. Not just rabbi or teacher or healer. Son of David was a title heavy with meaning. It was a messianic title that recognized Jesus as the promised deliverer, the fulfillment of ancient prophecies. This blind man, this beggar society had discarded, recognized who Jesus truly was before he could ever see him with physical eyes. His spiritual sight penetrated deeper than the perfect vision of those trying to silence him. And that's the first miracle in this story, that Bartimaeus saw the truth about Jesus when others missed it completely. He didn't need physical eyes to recognize divine authority when it passed by. And he wasn't going to let this moment slip through his fingers without fighting for his chance at transformation. The crowd pressed tighter around him. The rebukes grew sharper. Someone stepped on his outstretched fingers, grinding them into the dirt. Another kicked at his cloak, sending up a cloud of dust that made him cough. But sometimes, faith needs to be louder than the voices telling you to stay small, stay quiet, stay in your place. And then, the most beautiful sound Bartimaeus had ever heard. The crowd's angry murmur suddenly shifted. The flow of movement around him changed direction. The energy in the air transformed. He's stopping. The teacher heard him. He's asking for the blind man. Then a voice, closer now, speaking directly to him. Take heart. Get up. Jesus is calling for you. Can you imagine those words landing on Bartimaeus' ears? After years of people avoiding him, ignoring him, wishing he would disappear, suddenly being specifically called for. Being singled out not for mockery, but for attention. The words, Jesus is calling for you, must have been the sweetest phrase he had ever heard. What happened next reveals everything about Bartimaeus' faith and desperation. The Gospel of Mark tells us he threw his cloak aside, jumped to his feet, and made his way toward Jesus. Stop and think about what this means. That cloak was everything to Bartimaeus. In a world before social services or disability benefits, that cloak was his only possession of value. His bed at night, his collection plate during the day, his shelter from the cold. Everything he owned was wrapped in that cloak, and yet he threw it aside without a second thought. Why? Because he believed so completely that he was about to receive his sight that he would never need to return to begging again. That's faith that acts before the miracle happens. That's conviction so strong it lets go of security before receiving the promise. And blind Bartimaeus, who had never seen a path clearly in his life, somehow navigated through that pressing crowd toward Jesus. I imagine the crowd reluctantly parting, some with annoyance, others with astonishment at this beggar's boldness. With arms outstretched, stumbling but unstoppable, he moved toward the voice that had acknowledged his existence. Now comes one of the most profound moments in this encounter. Jesus looks at this blind man who has caused such a commotion and asks him a question that might seem unnecessary to everyone watching. What do you want me to do for you? Think about it. Isn't it obvious what a blind beggar would want? Yet Jesus asks anyway. Why? Because Jesus never assumes our needs. He wants us to name them, to claim them, to articulate exactly what we're seeking from him. There's power in declaring your need out loud, in finding the courage to ask specifically for what your heart truly desires. Jesus could have simply said, I know what you need, and healed him. But instead, he invited Bartimaeus into a moment of declaration, of personal connection. Bartimaeus didn't hesitate. He didn't downplay his request out of fear or shame. He didn't ask for money or food or even social acceptance. things that might have seemed more reasonable to ask for. With crystal clarity that many sighted people lack, he knew exactly what he wanted. "Rabbi, I want to see." 4 simple words, no elaborate speech, no religious formality. Just the raw, honest desire of his heart expressed with perfect clarity. In your life, can you express what you really want with such directness? Can you strip away all the peripheral desires and identify the core longing of your heart? Jesus' response was equally direct. "Go, your faith has healed you." And immediately, Scripture uses that word specifically, Bartimaeus received his sight. Try to imagine that moment. The first thing Bartimaeus ever saw was the face of Jesus. Light, color, shape, dimension, all flooding in at once after a lifetime of darkness. The shock would have been overwhelming. The sudden input of visual information after 27 years of blindness would have been like a tsunami crashing over his senses. Colors he had only heard described, the blue of the sky, the tan of sand, the varied hues of human faces, suddenly burst into his awareness. Shapes and depth perception where before there had been only blackness. The brightness of sunlight making him blink and tear up. The faces of the crowd, some amazed, some skeptical, some moved to tears themselves. What must it have felt like to see your own hands for the first time? To look down and discover your feet? To witness the play of light on skin? The expressions on faces that you had only ever touched before? But most importantly, to see Jesus looking back at you, to witness the compassion in those eyes, to see the face of the one who had just restored everything you had lost. I imagine Bartimaeus blinking rapidly, his eyes adjusting, tears streaming down his face, not tears of pain, but of overwhelming joy. His mouth opened, but no words came. How could words possibly capture what was happening inside him? The Gospel of Mark tells us something beautiful about what happened next. It says that Bartimaeus followed Jesus along the road. He didn't go back for his cloak. He didn't run to tell his family. He didn't even take time to adjust to his bewildering new reality. His first act with restored sight was to follow the one who had healed him. That's gratitude in action. That's faith that doesn't just receive and walk away. That's transformation that leads to devotion. And where was that road leading? To Jerusalem, to Passover, to the cross and eventual resurrection. Bartimaeus wasn't just healed. He was invited to witness the culmination of Jesus' earthly ministry. From roadside beggar to follower of the Messiah in one divine moment. So what can we learn from Bartimaeus, this hidden hero of faith? How does his story speak to our lives today? First, Bartimaeus teaches us about spiritual perception. He couldn't see with his eyes, but he saw the truth about Jesus more clearly than most. He recognized Jesus as the Son of David, the Messiah, when many with perfect vision miss this reality completely. Sometimes our physical circumstances can blind us to spiritual truths. Sometimes our comfort and security can dull our spiritual senses. But like Bartimaeus, we can develop spiritual vision that sees beyond our limitations. We can recognize God's presence even when our situation looks dark. Second, Bartimaeus shows us the power of holy desperation. He refused to be silenced by social pressure. When told to be quiet, he shouted all the louder. When facing opposition, he doubled down on his determination. How often do we give up at the first sign of resistance? How quickly do we silence our prayers when they're not immediately answered? How easily do we accept the limitations others place on us? Bartimaeus reminds us that sometimes breakthrough comes after pushing through resistance, not by avoiding it. Sometimes you have to be willing to make a scene, to disrupt the normal flow, to make people uncomfortable with your raw need and desperate faith. Third, notice how Bartimaeus responded when called. He threw aside his cloak, his security, his livelihood, his past identity. He didn't cling to what was familiar even though it was all he had known. Sometimes receiving our miracle requires letting go of what we've been clutching for security. Our old identities, our comfort zones, our backup plans, our just-in-case provisions. Bartimaeus couldn't receive his new future while clinging to the symbols of his past. Fourth, Bartimaeus knew exactly what he wanted. When Jesus asked, "What do you want me to do for you?" he didn't hesitate or generalize. He was specific and direct. "I want to see." How many of our prayers lack this clarity? How often do we approach God with vague requests rather than naming exactly what we need? Bartimaeus teaches us to be specific in our asking, to name our deepest desire without shame or hesitation. Finally, Bartimaeus shows us what to do after receiving our miracle. He followed Jesus. His healing wasn't the end of his story, it was the beginning. His gratitude wasn't just a thank you before walking away, it was lifelong devotion. So how does Bartimaeus' story intersect with yours? Perhaps you're sitting by your own Jericho road right now. You've been in the same painful situation for years. People pass by without really seeing you. Life happens around you, but not to you. You've grown accustomed to your particular darkness. Maybe it's not physical blindness, but something has robbed you of vision for your future. Maybe it's chronic illness that has defined your life. Perhaps it's addiction that has stolen your identity. It could be depression that has colored your world in shades of gray. Maybe it's rejection or abandonment that has convinced you you're not worth seeing. Or maybe you can relate to Bartimaeus' desperation. You've heard Jesus is passing by through a sermon, a song, a friend's testimony, and something stirs within you. A wild hope that perhaps your situation isn't permanent. That maybe, just maybe, your darkness could give way to light. Some of you are at the moment of decision right now. Will you stay silent, accepting what everyone says is your fate? Or will you cry out despite what others might think? Despite the voices telling you to accept your limitations? Others are pushing through resistance. The crowd is telling you to be realistic, to lower your expectations, to stop disturbing the peace with your needs and hopes. Bartimaeus would tell you, shout louder. Keep asking. Persist until Jesus stops for you. Perhaps you're standing before Jesus right now, hearing him ask that penetrating question. What do you want me to do for you? Can you articulate your deepest desire? Can you name what you really want without qualifiers or apologies? Or maybe you've received your miracle and now you're deciding what to do next. Will you go back for your cloak? Return to what's familiar and comfortable? Or will you, like Bartimaeus, follow Jesus down the road wherever it leads? Bartimaeus teaches us that faith is not passive acceptance of our circumstances. It's active, vocal, even disruptive when necessary. It persists when others say impossible. It sees possibility when others see only limitation. Jesus is still asking the question he asked Bartimaeus, "What do you want me to do for you?" Not because he doesn't know, not because he can't see your need clearly, but because he wants you to name it, to own it, to bring it into the light where he can transform it. And just as Jesus heard one desperate voice among hundreds in that Jericho crowd, he hears yours now. Among all the prayers rising from earth to heaven at this very moment, yours is distinct to him, recognizable, important. Your darkness may not be physical blindness. It might be chronic illness, depression, addiction, financial ruin, a relationship that seems beyond repair. But whatever form your darkness takes, the light of Christ can penetrate it. Bartimaeus wouldn't tell you that transformation is always instantaneous, but he would tell you it's always possible. He waited 27 years for his miracle. He endured decades of darkness before his moment of light. But when that moment came, a lifetime of waiting was redeemed in an instant. So take heart from this hidden hero of faith. Let his courage inspire yours. Let his persistence fuel your prayers. Let his clarity sharpen your requests. Let his immediate response challenge your hesitation. And remember, the first face Bartimaeus ever saw was Jesus. Whatever miracle you're seeking, whatever healing you need, whatever breakthrough you're desperate for, if it brings you face to face with Jesus, it's worth every moment of waiting, every effort of asking, every risk of believing. Because when faith meets Jesus on the road, darkness always gives way to light. If this story has touched you, let me know in the comments. And if you're still waiting by your Jericho road, share your Bartimaeus moment, how you're choosing faith even when you can't yet see the outcome. Until next time, remember that sometimes the greatest act of faith is simply refusing to be silent about what you need.